Well, on this President's Day, let's begin with the presidential race. In full swing now as candidates prepare for another round of primaries. Arizona and Michigan a week from tomorrow, and of course, Super Tuesday on March 6th. Now, over the weekend, GOP presidential hopeful Ron Paul was in Kansas City, Missouri, speaking at Union Station there to a crowd of more than 1,000 people. He came out with a pretty strong warning about the direction this country is headed in. And this is amateur video, so I warn you, but you should be able to hear what he says.
Now we're slipping into a fascist system where there's a combination of government and big business and authoritarian rule and the suppression of the individual right of each and every American citizen. That is what we have to reverse and get the people to agree with us.
Strong words there, of course, from the Texas congressman, and as usual, their words largely ignored by the mainstream media. So we thought we'd take some time to talk about this in depth, and I've got Lou Rockwell in Auburn, Alabama, to help us dissect what this means. Lou is the chairman of the Ludwig von Mises Institute and also the author of The Left, the Right, and the State. Hey there. Your thoughts, Lou, about whether or not this is case, that the country is headed down into a path of fascism?
Oh, it seems to me clearly true. Ron is the truth teller as usual. Because we have to remember, typically fascism, fascist are just epithets. But it's an actual political philosophy. It's an actual economic philosophy. From an economic standpoint, as Ron pointed out, it's a combination of big corporations and big government working together against the rest of society to illegitimately profit. Then you have militarism, belligerent nationalism, demonization of the other, Muslims in the American case today, and the welfare state and perpetual war. So is America slipping into a fascist state? Yeah. I mean, we think of fascism as just being an historical philosophy. Franco and Mussolini and Hitler and Horthy and Salazar and Roosevelt, I would add too, by the way. And think of it as being from the past, but it's not from the past. It really, I'm sorry to say, is the philosophy that's pretty much taken over the world. I mean, most countries have a fascist aspect to them of this corporatism. When we see Goldman Sachs appointing the Prime Minister of Greece and the Prime Minister of Italy, I mean, this is a fascist. That's a fascist act.
It's not just a philosophy. It's not just a philosophy from the past, though, as you say. It's also sort of a philosophy and ideology that many, I think, in both parties and, of course, in the media would call fringe or radical, using this word of fascist. This is usually a word that is something that many...
You're never supposed to point out the emperor has no clothes.
Right. I mean, just the word itself is something I think many people find derogatory. But I wonder, Lou, to what extent do you think this message is resonating with regular Americans, those who don't consider themselves fringe or radical, just people worried about the direction that this country is taking?
Well, they probably would not use the word, but I think more and more people are so rightly worried about the suppression of civil liberties in this country, the fact that the president claims the right to kill anybody, American or non-American, if he thinks they're a bad guy, to have the military arrest them. We haven't had this stuff since Lincoln. The military arrests you, put you into a secret military prison.
You're talking, of course, about the National Defense Authorization Act.
Yeah, I mean, this is, you know, they're openly claiming and enacting fascist powers, things that we think of as more appropriate for a Mussolini. But we only have to look at whether it's Obama or the Republicans, I might add. This is not just a Democratic thing. You see the president in league with the big firms on Wall Street and the big banks. As Ron always points out, it's not the middle class or the poor who got bailed out. It's the big banks. It's the big Wall Street firms. This is an aspect of corporatism, of the corporate state, where, again, this is what Mussolini invented way back in the 20s and really the teens of the last century. In the progressive era, fascism is an outgrowth of the progressive era, and it's a horrible philosophy, and unfortunately, much more robust than socialism. Socialism was always an economic basket case. Fascism, because it has aspects of capitalism, is less of a basket case, and therefore the government has more resources to do its dirty deeds with, whether internally against the people, against other people in other countries. In this expanding the American empire, we see this, of course, right around Russia. I mean, the U.S. has always wanted to encircle Russia, and now they're really stepping it up, and they want to encircle the whole world. The U.S. sees itself as the global government, and going right along with that is this ideology of militarism, again, of belligerent nationalism, welfarism, warfarism, It's a very unpleasant brew. It's a witch's brew.
And I think it's important that you talk about this. Of course, another one of Ron Paul's most outspoken messages and harshest critiques is about the wars that the U.S. is involved in and spends money on. And this is, of course, a warning that came decades ago also from President Dwight D. Eisenhower in his farewell address back in 1961. I want to play just a little bit about what he said and then talk about its relevance today.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
All right, Lou, to what extent is this military-industrial complex strong enough to remain as it is? I mean, when you think about Americans and you look at polls, people are sick of war. The Ron Paul school of thought continues to pick up steam that the government should not be involved in nor finance these wars. I mean, do you think Eisenhower's fear, which arguably has happened, sustain?
Oh, of course, it's exactly right. I mean, there are probably three big interest groups, if we're talking about the corporate state, that are in league with the government. You have the Wall Street banking complex, you have the big pharma medical complex, but not talked about much is the military-industrial complex. These are the people who wildly profit from war. They love war, they promote war. There's also a security aspect to this because of the Department of Homeland Security. But war is about the most profitable thing for any of the institutions connected to the government. And these people, they want to increase their profits. And they do so by promoting war, instigating wars. They work with the government. We see now, you know, the run-up against Syria and the run-up against especially Iran. They'd like both these countries destroyed and turned into new colonies or dependencies. And I think other countries are ahead of this. Pakistan, even Saudi Arabia, if we look at some of the plans that have been discussed to totally take over the Middle East, all oil, and have the U.S. empire run it. So it's a very alarming thing. It's all too real. I would argue it had been all too real by the time Eisenhower gave his speech. Really, we never got rid of it from World War II because they started up the Cold War almost immediately after the war as a justification for keeping the whole thing in operation, keeping the money flowing to the favored clients of the U.S. government, and creating a world empire. So,
and I think that Ron Paul even argued that in this speech Saturday night that it's not just been going on for 50 years, that it has been going on for 100 years. A side note, Lou, this speech that he gave at Union Station in Kansas City Saturday night was the same time as another sort of more establishment Republican event. It was a fundraising banquet of some kind. And word on the street is that several Republicans actually left the banquet to go to Ron Paul's rally to hear his message. Your thoughts on Ron Paul and his place sort of in his own party and the role you think that his messages have played in the campaign as a whole?
Well, of course, it has, you know, the establishment want to stomp him out. They don't like him. They fear him. And they're right to fear him, by the way, because of his appeal to young people and Americans of all ages. If you look at the Pew polls that were taken last summer, show that young people adhere to Ron Paul most of all for his views on war and peace. That is the powerful issue for the young. And also, since this is one of the reasons he's feared, he's brought back into the discussion not only such things as the Federal Reserve, but the permanent warfare state. And a lot of Americans who may not have been, who may just accepted the propaganda they hear from the media and from the government up to this time, now they're starting to think, well, wait a minute, why are we starting another war? Another multi-trillion-dollar expenditure in Iran, not to say the murder of a humongous number of people. How many have they murdered in Iraq? 1 million, perhaps? Yeah. We don't know for sure. So this is happening also in Syria, Libya, Yemen. I mean, it's all and they have worldwide objectives.
I think these are all questions a lot of people. You know,
Ron is resonating.
I think you're absolutely right. His messages, which he's been kind of spouting out for the last several years, decades even, are starting to resonate more and more. Lou Rockwell, chairman of the Ludwig von Mises Institute, also author of the book The Left, the Right, and the State.